Hi, everybody. This is Jodie from Maine Parent Federation. Hang in there. We're going to start in just a couple of minutes our webinar on transition to adulthood. We're just going to give it one more minute before we get started. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us today. My name is Jodie Hall. I'm a trainer with Maine Parent Federation, and we are going to be talking about transition planning today, looking at adulthood and what comes after high school. I am a parent of a child with a disability who is actually a sophomore in high school. So I am actually currently sort of going through this process and happy to learn more about this as I go through it as a parent and then be able to share that information with you as we go. A couple of housekeeping items for today. We are recording this, so this will be available in archives on Zoom and YouTube. We are also broadcasting via Facebook Live, and that will be accessible on that platform as well. Everybody is muted at this point, but we do have MPF employees monitoring the chat box on Zoom, as well as the Facebook Live chat box. So if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out and post them in those chat boxes, and then they'll make their way to me. So let's get started on transition planning. This is just a little disclaimer about Maine Parent Federation. We're not a legal service agency, but our job is just to disseminate information and help parents to make the best informed decisions that they can. Today, we're going to be looking at the transition years, talking about how to develop a transition plan, and what the transition services look like in Maine. Growing up, it's time to face it. Your kiddos are growing up and probably a lot faster than you would like. This is true in my life. Eventually your child will become an adult, and it's important to recognize the changes that come with this. You know, every stage of life, I swear, just keeps getting faster and faster. And sometimes the days are long, but it really is true that the years are very short. So what are we referring to when we're looking at the transition years? We're generally speaking about transition from high school into adulthood. And so it's a major milestone for everyone, whether or not there's disabilities existing or just typically developing kiddo. If there is a kiddo with disabilities, they may have additional challenges that they face during the time of transition and after high school, such as continued education and employment and independent living. Transition to adulthood is when a young person completes high school and or reaches the age of majority, which is 18, and is becoming an adult. Every kid is different, and so it's important to plan early to accommodate for their unique needs. Schools are required to provide a transition plan once a young adult turns 16 or enters 9th grade. We're going to talk a lot about what that looks like, how it's developed, and who's involved in the transition plan. This milestone also means a significant shift in how educational supports and support services are accessed. After graduating or aging out of school, services are no longer accessed through the public school system, Katie Beckett, and the Office of Child and Family Services. So this is a huge shift, one that as a parent myself, I am currently learning about and anticipating the navigation of new systems of care and services. So instead of being accessed through the public school and Katie Beckett and OCFS, if eligible, the services are then provided through Social Security, Maine Care, and the Office of Aging and Disability Services, also known as OADS. Parents and young adults often find themselves sewing together a patchwork of community services, job supports, post-secondary opportunities, and Section 504 of the American with Disabilities Act to best suit their needs. And this is true because there is no straight line for anyone who is graduating high school. There is no sort of set track for anyone post-secondary. And so families do often find themselves in a unique situation, piecing together different kinds of community supports or jobs, and accessing Section 504, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. So while the law determines the timing for transition plans, it's absolutely never too early to start implementing social advocacy skills into school or in-home support planning. Maine Parent Federation actually does a lot of work to promote self-advocacy skills within youth. We have a youth coordinator on staff named Dylan Campbell who works a lot with the youth, teaching them about self-determination and getting to know their strengths and their weaknesses to promote greater self-advocacy among them. We definitely feel like it's appropriate to work on these goals within the school setting, and self-advocacy goals and skill building can be written into the IEP at a very early age, as well as in the in-home support planning. Looking at the laws regarding transition, the special ed laws are regulated at the federal level by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA. And at the state level, they're overseen by MUSER, which is Maine's Unified Special Education Regulation. So MUSER must meet or exceed the expectation set forth in IDEA. So our local law and our local state agencies have IDEA as their baseline, and then they can exceed those guidelines in the regulation. And the laws exist to ensure that all children, regardless of disability, are entitled to a free and appropriate public education to meet their unique needs and prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. And the law exists because we want to make sure that all children are able to receive the opportunity to be educated within the public sector without the burden falling on the family. Often this is done through individualized education programs, IEPs, which is the plan that's developed for public school children who are in need of accessing special ed and accommodations. And again, this is a provision of IDEA. So what's the difference between an IEP and a 504? A 504 is actually not part of IDEA. It's not a provision from IDEA, but rather it is part of civil rights law. And it's essentially a protection for those who have disabilities to receive any kind of accommodation or modification to receive their school services or even post-secondary opportunities such as college or employment. And this is because it's part of the Rehabilitation Act, and it's mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So a lot of times, a parent might call our agency and say, my son or daughter has a 504 plan, and they are planning to go to such and such college after high school. Will their 504 plan follow them? And definitely the 504 plan with the accommodations will follow the student, but it is the student's job to advocate for their needs. It's the student's job to share that they have a disability and they require the accommodations or modifications in order for those to be provided. But this law does provide to prohibit discrimination.
I'm just going to jump in for a second, Jodie. This is Carrie Woodcock, the Executive Director for Maine Parent Federation. I just wanted to add to what Jodie's saying is when a student who has a 504 or an IEP is looking to go to post-secondary education, what's important to do is when looking at those colleges to specifically ask about their disability office. And if they don't have one, that's probably not a good choice for your child. If their disability office is what they refer to as just their student services and it's not specifically to fit the needs of children with special needs, then again, it's probably not the best option for them. If they are able to direct you specifically to somebody who works for an office of special services, ask for an appointment and go in and meet with them. And if you don't get a good feeling, then again, it's probably not a good choice for your child. So you should be interviewing the school and their Office of Special Services just as they're interviewing you.
Great, thank you for that. So since the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act does not apply after graduating or aging out of high school, higher educations do not have to provide these supports. That's just what we were talking about, that IEP and specialized instruction do not have to come at a higher education institution, but that this 504 does protect them for the accommodations. In Maine, the transition to adulthood also means the provider of community services will transfer from the Office of Child and Family Services to the Office of Aging and Disability Services. Excuse me. Transition planning is required to be in the IEP by the time the student enters 9th grade or earlier. The student is turning 16 prior to entering 9th grade. That's an IEP team decision. And the transition plan for each student will look different, and parents should feel confident in requesting the process beginning earlier if it's necessary.
Can we just double back a couple slides, Jodie?
Yeah.
If we go back to the slide that talks about, right, so this, nope, that one right there, sorry, the one that talks about IDEA. So what's important to note is sometimes parents will say to us, if my child is aging out of school or graduating and has an IEP, do they need to get a 504 plan written? No, what you need to do is if you're going to post-secondary or if you're going to a employment situation, is you would tell those individuals that your child has an IEP, the individuals that they'll be working with, and you provide them with the IEP, which will have the accommodations and modifications that would apply to a 504 plan. So you don't have to get a 504 plan, but you need to definitely communicate with the school, the institution, or even an employment situation that your child did have special education and these were the accommodations and modifications that they needed. And it's really important that it's actually coming from the student themselves. So you can help them in advocating, but self-advocating for themselves would be ideal in those situations. And then let's go forward one slide. And so what's important to note here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the webinar, but I want to make sure you understand that this transfer does not automatically happen. It falls on the responsibility of the shoulders of the parents and the individual with the disability to make this transfer to getting service from the Office of Child and Family Services, to getting service from the Office of Aging and Disability Services. They look very different, and they're two very different systems to navigate. So we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's important to know that that does not happen automatically. And if you're eligible for services through OCFS, it does not necessarily mean that you're eligible for services through ODES. Thanks, Jodie, that was it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Carrie's absolutely right. So we'll talk about sort of the application process and the transition process between those services. But yes, if a student is receiving services under the age of 18, it does not mean that they will automatically qualify for adult service. Under IDEA, there are 3 domains that need to be fulfilled in the transition plan. They're education, employment, and independent living. And I'm going to pause here for a second and just talk about this. A lot of times I find parents that I work with who have students in high school, I'll say, you know, what's your transition plan say? And oftentimes they say, oh, my son or daughter doesn't have one. And in reality, there actually is one in place. It just hasn't been much of a focus for the family in working with the school. It is a requirement of IDEA, and so it is one of the federal regulations. And schools, I find, are complying with that, but sometimes there's not quite as much family awareness or involvement. And so it's really important to know that the domains that are covered within that transition plan are education, employment, and independent living. And that and we will continue to talk about this, but the goals that are written in the IEP will be informed by the transition goals, so that the IEP goals are then working to develop the skill set to help the student reach the transition goals for life after high school. Who is on the team? And we're talking about the transition planning team. The school is responsible for pulling together a team to work on the student's transition plan. And the team is required to invite students to participate in the IEP once the plans are considered. But they really should consider inviting them to attend at an earlier age. This is something that we definitely encourage as an agency, not just because it helps to build self-advocacy skills, but it really does help to bring a new perspective to the IEP table and the transition teams. We say, you know, students should be involved in some capacity from a very early age on. So when my son was very little, he simply just came to the beginning of the meeting and said hi to everybody. He thought it was kind of cool that all of his teachers were in one spot and his parents were there, and he might share for, you know, 5 minutes about something that's going on in his life, you know, something fun he was doing, like riding his bike or whatever. But then as he aged, he had more responsibility, or has more responsibility within these settings. And so at this point now, we spend time planning before the meeting, and he writes up with my assistance the list of things that are working for him well in school, the things that he enjoys, the things that he would like to change, the things that are hard. And then he comes to the meeting, and for the first 20 minutes, he is the one who reads these items off and engages with all of his team in this way. And I feel like it's very valuable for him to be a part of things, but it's also really valuable for the rest of the team to sort of have a visible reminder of, you know, who are we talking about? Why are we talking about? And it's a more complete picture of Andrew as a student, my son as a student.
I'm going to stop you for a minute, Jodie, because we've got some questions in the chat box. Kathy Adams asked, do all special ed students get a summary performance document to bring onto college and adult services? And the answer to that is yes, Kathy. They should be receiving this document from their local district as part of their transition plan when they are graduating or aging out. Keep in mind, it may look different per each district, but it is something that they should be receiving. And then Helen Corbu, who's a voc rehab counselor down in Southern Maine and works a lot with us. She's awesome. She's adding on that all colleges will also need more documentation in addition to the IEP. Updated education and cognitive testing within 3 years helps the process to set up accommodations right from the start. Yes, thank you, Helen, for adding that. I wanted to just make sure that we were addressing that a parent should not be changing the IEP to a 504 in order to get the accommodations in college, but you are correct, and thank you for adding that. Very helpful that you will need additional information when going to college. You should supply as much as possible. And a college that wants that documentation is a college that would work well for your child because they're showing that they're interested in their present level of performance. And I apologize for the little visitor that keeps popping in and out behind me, but this is the pleasures of working from home. Donna said the volume went down substantially. I experienced that for a split second, Donna, and then it came right back. I thought it was my headphones, but if you guys are still having an issue hearing us, please let us know. Helen also said, Kathy, some schools I work with do a great summary performance, but not all. When they are done well, they really help. And I would agree, Helen, yes, it's a local district thing, just like some schools do wonderful transition plans and others don't. But making sure that when you start a transition plan early on, that you're voicing what you want the transition plan to look like, and that you're expecting a summary of performance when your child leaves school. And then Karen said, my son's lead teacher suggested getting case management in community section 28 in October of 2018. We were attempting to reopen case management with Broadreach of Maine, which is closed suddenly. Every time I ask for transition support, the person on the phone says, we don't have to start that now because he's not 18. I'm interjecting this because you just said start early. We get different info when I'm out there seeking for an agency closer than a 2-hour drive. So if you're talking about the school versus the state systems are two very different systems. Schools have to start transition planning when your child enters high school or at the age of 14. So you should have a school transition plan no later than that point in time. You can start with voc rehab doing pre-employment services at the age of 14. At the age of 16, you're supposed to be asked if you would like to invite vocational rehabilitation to your student's IEP meeting. At that point in time, the voc rehab counselor would be coming to the IEP meeting, but you can start pre-employment services with that voc rehab counselor at the age of 14. If you're talking about the Office of Age and Disability Services and transition planning, when we work with Peter Auger and doing our training for our family support navigators, he says to us that at 17 and a half years old, you should start the intake process. And so each area of Maine has an intake specialist. And your VR counselors will be familiar with this, and your school counselors and case managers should also be familiar with this, but they are not as familiar with this, which is why we always encourage students to get VR on board, because they are more familiar most times than the schools are familiar with this process. But in order to qualify for services through the Office of Aging and Disability Services, you need to have a neuropsych eval done. You need to have recent school assessments available. It's a much more in-depth process, and you can start that process, the intake process, at 17 and a half. What we always recommend is, if you do have child case management services, or if you don't have child case management services, is that as your child is getting closer to the age of 18, so for right now, my daughter doesn't have child case management. I basically do it for her. But as she gets older to the age of 18, I'm going to look to get her child case management again and use an agency that has both child and adult case management, because that agency will be informed about transitioning from child services to adult services, because they have both case managers on their team. I'm getting the feeling that you are from Northern Maine and your services are very limited, which is a issue here in the state of Maine. And because you're saying you have to get an agency that's closer than a 2-hour drive, and that you know, it's been difficult to get child case management back in place. What you want to look for right now is an agency that would offer adult case management, but I would work specifically and closely with the school right now to getting your child qualified for services through the Office of Aging and Disability Services and doing the intake process. You can also find out who the intake coordinator is for your region and call them. They would be the ones that would be able to tell you specifically what you will need to get qualified. Somebody's saying hi to Helen. She worked with her in VR. Kathy Adams is saying very true. Jennifer Billings is saying also adaptive rating scales for OADS intake. So yes, thank you, Jennifer. And sometimes it's a Vineland assessment that can give you that adaptive rating scales. What you need to do in working with the school is look to when your child is due for their triannual IEP meeting. And that's when you can ask for a lot of these assessments to be done as part of your child's transition planning. So a lot of times, prior to transition planning, a school might not do a Vineland assessment because it's not necessary for their academic achievements, which is true. However, when your son or daughter is at age 14 or higher and has a transition plan, a Vineland assessment is necessary for their academic instruction because it's part of their transition plan. So what you really want to do is check in with OADS, call the intake specialist. They are happy to provide you with a list of materials you're going to need to provide them for that intake process, because it's so much easier for them if you start that intake process with everything in line. And then what you do is go back to the school and say, I'm going to need you to do these things as part of the transition plan, because part of my son or daughter's transition plan is getting qualified for state services. Helen says, yes, excellent advice, Carrie. Cindy says, Voc Rehab states that they only attend IEPs only when students are 16 or junior in high school. So Helen might want to chime in on this, but I've worked with Libby Stone Sterling on this on a regular basis. The pre-employment services aren't necessarily attending an IEP. Those are services that are available for the child to take advantage through Voc Rehab that helps them achieve the skills prior to becoming employed. VR can come in and should be invited in to an IEP meeting when a child is 16 or a junior in high school. Is there a list of agencies somewhere that do both child and adult case management? We can, as part of our follow-up to you guys, there is usually a list on the Maine.gov. There's a website on Maine.gov that shows you a list of provider services. I'm not sure if it tells you exactly if they do both adult and child case management, but what you could do is do a search on that and we can provide you with that link. And then you can call the agencies in your area and ask them if they do both child and adult case management. Our son with autism is graduating this year and we are looking at applying to the Village Clubhouse. They informed us that one requirement is their clients have an Axis 1 diagnosis. Do you know if autism is indeed an Axis 1 diagnosis? And if so, would you need to provide documentation to organizations with the application? Thank you. So what you're talking about specifically is that provider is saying that that's what they need in order for them to be eligible for their program. That's not necessarily what you would need to be eligible for services through the Office of Aging and Disability Services. I'm personally not familiar with an Axis 1 diagnosis. If anybody else is, please feel free to chime in. If not, we can research that for you and get you the answer. We get a list of questions that come in on the chat, so we can definitely follow back up with you, Rebecca, on that. But what you're talking about specifically, I believe, is criteria for that specific provider. What can be very confusing for families is that our state has qualification processes and wait lists. And then once you qualify and become eligible, then you start working with individual providers who have different programming, and they might have qualifications for their specific programming and then their own wait lists as well. So it's a two-step process for families, which can be very confusing and frustrating. Last I knew, Kim Murphy, last I knew VR doesn't do pre-voc services. Autism can be an Axis 1 diagnosis. So VR does do pre-employment services, which can start at the age of 14. As a school, we have tried to involve vocational rehab into our IEPs, but he never comes to the meeting or works with family in Northern Maine. So Joanna, what I would do is reach out to Libby Stone Sterling, who is the Director of Vocational Rehabilitation, and provide that information to you. We have a close relationship with Libby, and I know that she would want to hear that feedback. And thank you for not providing his name here on this forum, but I would definitely let Libby know the area and region that you're working in, and she can definitely get in touch with that individual. Rebecca says, okay, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. I thought so, but needed clarification. Robin says, we welcome and encourage being invited to the IEP meeting. However, at times it can be difficult to attend. I do try to attend IEP meetings with students on my caseload that are juniors and seniors. So that's Robin. She works vocational rehabilitation. And Rebecca Bush says, great. So I think we're caught up. Robin or Helen, can you speak to at all the pre-employment services that start at age 14? Because that's been questioned a little bit. And I'm pretty confident in stating that those start at 14 because I've watched Libby attend our family support and navigator trainings and speak to those. But if you could just confirm or deny that, that would be great. I'm happy to be right or wrong in either situation. I just want to make sure that I'm providing accurate information. Joanna has chimed in and says, Axis 1 diagnosis is usually shown on a psychological evaluation. Thank you, Joanna. So a neuropsych evaluation, which should be done at your child's triennial eval. Helen says, it really depends on the individual situation and the focus of the IEP meeting. So it may be different ages for different students, depending on what is going on, kind of gray. Yes, we do employment services, but it does look different in every school. Thank you, Helen. So that provides a better answer. It's sort of a gray area. Again, Maine is a local control state. So some of the things that come down from our Department of Labor and our Department of Education are specific guidance, and it's up to the local school districts to make sure that they're implementing them correctly. And it's up to parents to know that to understand and know their rights so they can hold their districts accountable. We have a comment from Facebook. We homeschool now, so how does the process of transition planning and vocational rehabilitation work? So if you're homeschooling and your child qualifies for an IEP, IDEA still says you have the right to get services through your public schools with an IEP process. So if you're homeschooling and you've qualified for special education and you have an IEP with that school, you can still take advantage of services that come with that IEP. You have to work with your local district on that. And Dylan, if you could just follow up, if Mary has any follow-up questions, let us know. Okay, we will keep hold on. Sorry. Shayna, this is the link to case management offers. Thank you, Shayna. Options in Maine. Once you are approved under ODES for that case management. So there's the link to find case management agencies. It's important to remember that when you're going through the intake process, and some of this information that I'm covering right now and answering these questions is provided in the webinar later on. I'm happy to absolutely answer them now, and then we can just sort of fast forward through them as we get later on in the webinar. But as you're applying through an intake process, what you are applying for is eligibility through ODES for case management. Then after you become eligible for case management, a couple things: case management for adults. Once eligible, you are always eligible, even if you are not using it. So if you become eligible and then 15 years later, you decide that you want to use it, you're still eligible to take advantage of it. It does not necessarily mean that you're eligible for the waivers. Some of the more popular waivers for adult case management is Section 21 and Section 29, the residential and community supports. Just because you're deemed eligible for case management does not mean you're eligible for those waivers. A case manager will work you through the process of becoming eligible for those waivers if, in fact, you do want to apply for those waivers. So that's important to remember. Thank you for the link for the providers. Robin says, I agree with Helen, the pre-employment services are usually performed in a small group setting, such as a tour of an employer or pre-readiness work within the classroom. And Helen says, yes, we are working on doing more collaborative vocational exploration groups with school teams, transition career exploration work groups, and summer programs. Still a work in progress, but moving forward for sure. Okay, I'm gonna throw it back to you, Jodie.
Okay. Thanks for all that. And I really appreciate Carrie's help on this. I can't see all the chat boxes and the comments, so it's great that we're tag teaming on this. So getting back to the transition plan and who is a part of that, other members of the team must include parents, a mainstream education teacher, a special ed teacher, and an administrator with fiscal authority. And then the voc rehab counselor we just talked about needing to be invited to the table and 11th grade. So any other additional support personnel and community agencies may also be invited to attend. This would be especially important if they're providing a link to employment or any type of living opportunities once the student has graduated. And as always, parents can invite anybody they'd like to attend the meetings. We definitely recommend giving the school as much advance notice when you're bringing somebody to a meeting, just as common courtesy. Nobody likes to be surprised, and you have a right to invite anybody, but it's also a great idea to just give advance notice. What does the team do? For each domain, and again, we talked about that a few slides ago. Remember, that was education, employment, and independent living. So for each domain, the team supports the student to identify their goals, the steps necessary to reach those goals, and the services that will prepare them to attain their goals. And so it is supposed to be very much based on what the student envisions life to be like after high school and what their goals are post-secondary. So the student's role in the meetings, they should be preparing for the meetings before they happen, and they should do this both with a teacher and a parent. Students should really be able to talk about what their dreams are for their future with the families and teachers. And, you know, this is easier for some students than it is for others. In our particular instance, my son needs a lot of advance time to consider these kinds of questions. And so we do that at home, and then we record it for him, and then he recalls that later.
Let me just jump in for a
Students
second,
really
Jodie.
need to be able to share their strengths and weaknesses. We talked about that a little bit ago in terms of being an effective self-advocate as well, and describing the disability and supports that they have, or the disability they have and the supports they may need as well. Very important for being a good self-advocate. Ideally, it would be great for students to have opportunities to volunteer and job shadow, or even have paid work experience. And then keeping track of their IEP transition goals should be part of their experience and their role as well. This will allow them to participate in discussions or even potentially to lead their IEP meetings. I think this is a goal for a lot of students, that they can eventually run a student-led IEP meeting in which they are the ones, they're the loudest voice at the table. You know, they're the ones who are sort of setting the agenda and guiding the direction that it goes.
So Jodie, let me just step in for one quick second.
Sure.
Can you go back a slide? Sorry. When we talk about being able to talk about personal dreams for their future with families and teachers, we understand that there are students with very high significant needs that may not be able to directly speak to what their futures and dreams are. What we can do, though, is work with our districts to do different types of interest inventories and different types of assessments that can be accommodated and modified, so that you can try to find out what that child's interests are. And you can bring those assessments to the table. So it shouldn't just be an interest inventory and assessment, shouldn't just be a guidance counselor saying, or a case manager saying, I had a conversation with a student. It should be things that parents are doing at home and having conversations. It should be conversations with some of their more trusted teachers. It should also be maybe a conversation that they're having with their peers. So there should be different types of interest inventories that are taken into consideration. And some of them are going to be more formal assessments and some are going to be less formal, but taking all of those as a whole and not just one specific assessment that was done during one period of time, because who knows what type of day any person was having at that moment in time. So when we're talking about identifying a child's dreams for the future, it needs to be something that is looked at through multiple different viewfinders. I would also say that it's important to note and emphasize with parents and with the individuals that as you start this process in 9th grade, these dreams for the future are going to evolve and change, and that is natural. So whatever's being identified as 9th grade is not locking that student into that supposed one interest for the rest of their high school career and their post-educational future. It's just something that we're identifying to help to try to create an academic plan for them, but we understand that it's going to evolve and change as the student grows. And likewise, the transition plan should evolve and change with that student as well as their academic goals.
Okay, so looking at the family roles, families really should be offering opportunities for youth to develop self-advocacy skills. We keep sort of circling back to this because this is such an important foundational concept for moving forward for youth. In addition to that, opportunities to increase responsibility and independence at home. Obviously, this is something that can change over time and build sort of layers upon as the student grows and develops, or as the youth grows and develops. Offering sort of controlled opportunities for choices to be made when kids are really young starts to lay a good foundation for decision making and self-determination, and then expanding those opportunities to become greater in their sort of weight of decisions. So, you know, when my son was 5, say, I would say, would you like broccoli or green beans for dinner? And he was able to make a choice in a very controlled environment based on what he wanted. But then as he got older, obviously, we started building on those concepts, and he got to a point where he's able to make much greater decisions. Talking to your young adult about where they see themselves in the future. This kind of piggybacks off of the last slide, and Carrie summarized that nicely, that obviously kids are different and have all different levels of abilities, and some may be able to see into the future better than others. And this is really about meeting them where they are and helping them to envision something beyond right now. It's important to be able to discuss how and why specific accommodations may be helpful. If the youth does not understand why they're receiving an accommodation, then they're really not going to be very likely to advocate in the future for the accommodation. Families should always be attending the IEP meetings and supporting the youth's goals. And as they age, of course, the youth goals should really become more important and more of a focus. And monitor the progress on the IEP transition goals as well. Families should also help by becoming familiar with the opportunities that come after high school, whether it be voc rehab or any community programs or post-secondary educational opportunities, knowing the options. The school's role in this is to initiate the transition planning process and ensure that an appropriate plan is developed and the services are provided. We should always invite the youth to participate in their IEPs, no later than 9th grade, and again, we would say earlier, and prepare the youth to participate or lead their meetings. So this is something that can be built into an IEP as well. There can be goals that are written around self-determination and self-advocacy with the intent and purpose to prepare youth to lead their meetings eventually. And the school should definitely be providing assessments to determine skills and abilities, as well as areas of accommodations, and include the youth in developing the goals, of course. Additionally, they should be identifying the school programming and accommodations which are appropriate for the student and their needs. And then connecting the student and family to all of the options post-secondary and supports that would help through the transition. Adult services, continuing education, and community. And then this last point, going back to initiating the application for voc rehab no later than 11th grade.
So I would also jump in and say that what a big misconception is that the transition plan is written after the academic plan is written. And when your child enters high school and has a transition plan, the transition plan should be written first, because ideally the transition plan is what's going to fuel the academic goals for your child. So knowing what their goals are post school is going to fuel the courses that they're taking, whether they're going to do a 4 or 5 year plan while they're in high school, and what services they're going to want to take advantage of. So make sure that, and it's our job as parents just to make sure that the school is looking at the transition plan first and writing the goals for the transition plan first, and then using that transition plan to write your academic goals.
Absolutely, that's key, because you want to make sure that you're maximizing the time that the student is in school to yield positive results for their future. So this is a nice graphic of person-centered planning, and just a reminder that the individual is at the center of it all, and that we need to be listening to their wants and their needs, and everything else sort of stems from that. Services are chosen based on multiple interest inventories, which we referenced a little bit earlier, which the school conducts with the student to identify their interests, strengths, and needs. And again, there can be formal assessments and less formal assessments. Some of this can take place within the school setting or within the home setting. It can be as simple as just interview questions, or it can be something more significant, such as an aptitude.
So Helen has just jumped in and said the best IEPs that she's attended are where the students lead in some way, when the team hears what the students' hopes and dreams are, and it changes the whole energy of the meeting, and the discussion goes right into transition as a basis for how the rest of the meeting plan and the plans for classes, which is why we say start as early as possible. My daughter started attending her IEP meetings in first grade. It doesn't mean that she stayed for the whole meeting. It doesn't mean that she led the meeting. It means that she became familiar with the meetings and that she was able to demonstrate her present level of performance live and in person, which I think is probably the strongest asset to student-led or students participating in their IEPs. Kathy Adams says Maine used to have a number of regional transition councils. Southern Maine, SMAC, the Southern Maine Agency Advisory Council on Transition, still meets every month. Could the state policymakers think about revising these regional councils since transition has come so strongly to the forefront? I would agree with that, Kathy. And I would say that's something that we could possibly bring to the Children's Cabinet, but also to our Commissioner of Education. I think they would be open to that. I would say that right now probably isn't the best time to introduce that idea. But yes, I would agree having those agents. I used to go to the SMAC meetings all the time prior to becoming the executive director. And we still have an individual from Maine Parent Federation attend those meetings, and there are invaluable resources that are shared at those meetings. And I would say it's a good use of time for the districts that attend those meetings. And Helen says, yes, yes, Carrie, about starting with the transition plan. Thank you, Helen. Okay, go ahead, Jody.
All right, thank you. One of the most important steps for the team moving forward is to help the student develop a vision for their future. How do they envision their life just a few years from now? Where do they see themselves living? Will they continue their education? And what about work? So this was really interesting because when my son transitioned to high school, we started this whole process, and I very much thought I knew what he wanted and where he was headed. And a lot of that, it turns out, after talking with my son and just the ideas I had were simply ideas within my own head. They weren't in his head. And so it was really interesting to see sort of the incongruencies between what he wanted and what I thought he wanted. So age-appropriate transition assessments, and we're going to sort of whip through this because we've talked about this, but the schools may use a variety of both formal and informal assessments to gather information about the whole student, you know, how they learn and their weaknesses and their strengths. The informal assessments, again, included interviews, possibly career and goal exploring exercises with the young person and family. And formal assessments could be interest inventories, employment experiences, and vocational assessments and aptitude testing. The assessments really do need to show the areas of interest and needed growth, as well as how the student learns, because those are the bits of information we need to truly develop a plan to meet the student's needs. And then we can pursue those 3 transition domains in an appropriate manner for the student. Again, the transition domains going back to education, employment, and independent living.
I'm going to jump in for a minute. Kathy Adams said, would the transition plan include the assistive technology that the student will need for independent living, work, or further education? Also, would it identify what funding will be used to buy that assistive technology? And yes, Kathy, that would be an appropriate place on a transition plan under services and accommodations and modifications that would fall as far as what assistive technology that the individual will need. They should get that assistive technology, excuse me, prior to leaving school so they can become familiar with it and be able to use it. In vocational rehabilitation, if it's assistive technology, in order for them to be able to access their employment goals or their post-secondary goals, can be a source of funding for that assistive technology.
Okay, thanks. So individuals who set specific and measurable goals in their plan are most likely to meet their goals. And I would say this is just sort of principally true across the board. But the transition goals need to fall under those 3 domains we talked about and should be created prior to the academic goals, because the academic goals need to support the transition goals. We've referenced this a couple of times now throughout this webinar, but it's really, really important. So going back to the beginning when I said I talk with a lot of families who are unsure whether or not their students have a transition plan in place, it's really important to know what the transition plan is, to have it be appropriate and accommodating to each individual student, and to then devise the IEP academic goals to support those transition goals. This is when all the work is taking place. Here are some examples of transition goals. Under the domain of education, it says after graduating or aging out of public school, the student will apply to attend a 2-year veterinary technician program at an in-state community college. For the domain of employment, while still in school, in order to support the student's goal to become a veterinary technician after completing the vet tech program, the student will look to have a paid work experience within a local vet office. And the goal for independent living. While attending the veterinary tech program, the student will live at home with their parents with the goal of increasing independent living skills to support living in an apartment with a roommate after completing.
I just want to note that these goals are pretty specific and pretty advanced, and I know there are a number of people watching who are thinking there's no way my child could attend vet school, including my own child, or become a vet technician, never mind attend vet school. We understand that. What we wanted to do was provide you with examples just to show you the detail to which those goals should be written. So an independent living goal could be that the child is living at home with their parents, but has access, is able to cook a meal on their own, is able to stay home alone, and is able to navigate their own transportation. So things of that nature, whatever makes them independent. We just wanted to provide you with goals that we've kind of felt hit on all the different areas. So please understand that we know that specific goals, it could be far out of the reach of the individuals you are working with. What you want to do is look at those goals and be sure to hit upon the components that meet the present level of performance for your students and for your children.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The first time I actually read those examples, I quick dug out my son's transition plan because I thought, whoa, wait a minute. That's not what ours looks like. But those examples are really important more in the structure of how they are developed more than in the specifics. And while that may be an appropriate example for some students, it's by no means appropriate for all. So again, this slide just talks about how the previous examples really are specific, but the goals really are individualized, and as the student is younger, they can be much broader, and then as they get closer to graduation and transition age, they do need to become more specific within nature. And again, the transition plan, like an IEP, is a living document. It can be changed at any time to reflect any new interests or skills or goals that the youth has for the future.
So we have a question from Heather Nelson, who's saying she has a son with an IEP and a son with a 504, and she wonders if the school should be doing a transition plan for her son with a 504. And the answer to that question is no, Heather. The transition plan is specific to the IEP and not to a 504. There is not a transition plan in a 504. However, what the school should be doing, my son has a 504 and is a freshman at Thornton Academy here in Saco. And what the school should be doing for children who have a 504 plan is working on self-advocacy. So part of those 504 plans can be that the teachers will work with your child on how to ask for what they need within their 504 plan, working up to them becoming completely independent to ask for the accommodations and modifications in the 504, so that they're able to do that in an employment situation or a post-secondary school situation. So that can be part of the 504. We just rewrote my son's plan, and one of my issues was he doesn't like when I advocate for him because he wants to be independent, but he's not necessarily advocating for what he needs. So what are the avenues that we can use with his teachers to make sure that they're prompting him to ask for what he needs when they notice he needs more time and he's not using it? And what's the easiest way to make that happen so that he doesn't feel different from his peers? One of his biggest things is he feels different from his peers when he's asking for his accommodation. So how can he access that without feeling different from his peers? And the school is very open, and we were able to write some things within the 504 plan that isn't necessarily specially designed instruction, because that's not what a 504 plan is, but accommodations and modifications, like if Noah needs extended time for a test, he's just writing at the top of the test, I need extended time. And then it's the job of the teacher to get back in touch with him to arrange that extended time. So really, if you're looking at a 504, there is not a transition plan, but there can be a lot of work done around self-advocacy and how a student can access their accommodations and modifications so they get comfortable with it. So when they do graduate, they are able to do that for themselves within an employment situation or post-secondary situation. Thanks.
Thank you. What transition services will your young adult utilize? Again, these are things that should be clearly defined in the IEP and have deadlines for when they're appropriate. They should also include who is responsible for providing them. They can include, but are not limited to, providing ways to acquire self-determination and advocacy skills. Again, we hit that point over the head with a hammer at this point, because this is key for us in terms of preparing youth for their futures. Connecting a student with VR, instructing and training on life skill tasks, such as opening a bank account or using public transportation, completing applications for adult service eligibility, identifying clubs or recreational activities that support their interests, and creating academic goals to support transition goals. In Maine, when an individual becomes 18, they are considered an adult. They've reached the age of a majority. And so with this comes the transfer of rights from parents to the individual who's turned 18. Means that all the legal authority of, legal and financial decisions fall on the newly turned 18-year-olds, and they are considered adults. 1 year before the individual turns 18, there must be a statement included in the transition plan that states the individual has been informed of the transfer of rights that occur.
What's important to remember there is that statement does not mean that the teachers, case managers, or whoever are looking to the parents and saying, you have to get guardianship. So please remember that that decision is an individualized decision for every family, and it's up to that family to have those discussions. You can look to schools and your medical providers and Maine Parent Federation for some guidance on that. We do a supported decision-making workshop as well, separately from this workshop, where we go into a lot more details as to what guardianship looks like, what it really means, and helping you to explore the best fit for your family. But we oftentimes hear from individuals who tell us that they're being encouraged to get full guardianship from medical providers and school districts. And if they don't get it, they won't be able to attend IEP meetings or go to medical visits. And that's not necessarily true. So we want to make sure that you're educated about all the options and make the best choice. And the best choice may be full guardianship for your family, and we respect that. But we want to make sure that you're making that decision with the most knowledge possible. What if a child has turned 18 and signed a V9 contract with OCFS? Can he or she receive services through ODES simultaneously, or does he or she have to wait until coming off of a V9 contract? I'm gonna have to look up a V9 contract, to be honest with you, Maureen. I can tell you, there are some services that you can still continue to receive through OCFS while receiving some services for ODE. So it no longer, what used to happen is if you applied for services and you weren't aging out of school until you turned 20, so you were still in school, and you had applied for a Section 21 or 29 waiver, and your number came up on the wait list, you had to make a decision as to whether or not you were staying in school and continue to receive those services, or if you were going to move forward with the services through the Office of Aging and Disabilities, which meant that you had to forego finishing school. That's no longer the case, unless it's, I mean, there are some services that you would have to drop out of school to receive, but you can still receive some job supports and some case management services. You can't have case management through OCFS and through ODES at the same time, so you'd have to decide as to which agency you're going to use. But there are some circumstances now where you don't have to make a decision as to, I'm going to stop my public schooling and receive all my services through the Office of Aging and Disability Services with a worry about being dropped to the bottom of the wait list. And that's where case management is really important to have, because they can help you and they'll be familiar with where the wait list is at, how long it might take for you to receive services, what would be the best option as far as, you know, if you can stay in school and still receive some job supports or some community supports or some in-home supports. So I don't think you can receive services from OCFS and ODES at the same time, but I do know that you can receive some services through your public schooling and ODES at the same time. And you're not being forced to make a decision, and it's specific to specific services, and case management can really sort of help navigate that process. Go ahead, Jodie, sorry.
No, you're good. So we're looking at the work zone now. This is just a slide that talks about how much the work environment has changed. And if we didn't know that before the last 5 weeks, we do now. Many of the flexibility that jobs now offer today was not possible previously. And thanks to assistive technology and accommodations, a lot of barriers have been broken down for employment. One of the great things about Voc Rehab is that they can help a young person really prepare for, find and keep employment, and really help the student to learn where their skills and interests lie. We're going to talk a little bit more about Voc Rehab, even though I know we've got a few Voc Rehab counselors on this webinar who could probably take this to a whole new level from where I am. But Voc Rehab VR is a service that assists people to prepare for, find, and keep employment. And the counselors help to develop an individualized plan for employment, IPE, that helps individuals reach their personal employment goals. And the plan might include activities like visiting employers, job shadowing, and paid work experience. We talked about this a little bit earlier as well in the webinar, that there are different VR offices across the state. The headquarters are in the Maine's Department of Labor Career Center, and every high school in the state has a counselor assigned to work with them.
Helen says you're doing great, Jodie.
Oh, thanks, Helen. VR recommends making an application for services at age 16. Talked about all of this, but we also talked a little bit about the pre-employment transition services, and have determined it's a bit of a gray area about who's eligible for that, but it does exist. And anyone can request an application from your school or local VR office. So the school can initiate that, but a parent as well can initiate that. A video here about how VR has helped an individual. I'm hoping that it works, so bear with me for a minute.
Hit the play arrow, Jodie. In the middle of your screen, do you see it?
I don't have a play arrow, really.
Yeah, it pops up on the white shirt.
There's nothing there right now. I wonder if there's a delay.
Your arrow is right on it. It's okay if it doesn't work. This is the beauty of doing everything online right now. We can share that link in the chat box too.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting it.
Before you move on.
Anyway, it's a great video. We will post that and make sure that it's accessible to everybody. Oh, hang on one second. No, it's gone.
Hold on a sec. Let me just post the link in the chat box.
Okay. Now my screen is frozen. Hang on.
You can end it and start the PowerPoint from the next slide if you want.
Okay, are you guys looking at the SSI slides? Did it work?
Yep, we are now.
Okay, great. So moving on to Social Security income, SSI, which is the federal program that provides monthly income to individuals who are older, blind, or disabled and have little to no income. Children who receive benefits before the age of 18 must reapply to be determined eligible under the adult criteria and definition of disability. So this is another instance where if you've received a benefit as a child under the age of 18, you are not automatically going to transfer benefits to adulthood. Many families often worry that a young person will lose benefits if they accept a job in which they're receiving pay, but there are exceptions for people age under 22. There are protections in place so that they are able to have a source of employment as well as to keep their health insurance and SSI benefits. Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, is a program that provides monthly income and benefits to adults who become disabled and no longer able to work. This program does require an individual to have work credits. Maine Medical Center offers benefit counseling services to help people receiving SSI who want to work. This is a complicated system. I know I get questions about this a lot, and it's really an individualized system. So working with somebody like one of the community work incentive coordinators at Maine Med Center are really helpful in maximizing an individual's benefits and access to what they can receive.
So what's important to remember is in order for your child to get services for the Office of Aging and Disability Services, they need to have Maine Care. And so the back door into Maine Care for adults with disabilities is to first apply and become eligible for SSI or SSDI. And once determined eligible, then they are considered eligible for Maine Care benefits as well. And then, in order to get adult case management and any waiver type programs, you have to have those Maine Care benefits. So it's definitely a multi-step process, but starting with Social Security and becoming eligible so that you can become eligible for Maine Care more quickly and more easily is probably the best place to start. Helen Corvo says, Access counts for SSI as well. That's Tara Embry. She works for Maine Parent Federation and she's our Maine Care specialist. Helen Corvo said they do a lot of work with CWICS and they are awesome. Tara says there are income and access tests for individuals with SSDI and Maine Care. So when a person does turn 18, the parental income no longer counts. And so when you are filling out the Social Security forms, sometimes parents are looking at the forms and it can get very, very confusing and they don't want to report that their child's paying anything. That's going to hurt their eligibility in the long run. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you are reporting that the child is participating in expenses in the household and that helps their eligibility in how much they would receive. When do you reapply for SSI, 18 or 21? So if a child is eligible for SSI under you, when they turn 18, they'll become eligible for SSI under themselves and not under the family anymore. So your income would no longer be considered eligible, so it would be considered 18. Go ahead, Jody.
All right. So work credits are credits that you earn throughout your work history. And excuse me, in order to qualify for SSDI benefits, you do need to have those work credits, generally 20 work credits in order to access those benefits. There's also a note on this slide about in order to receive the Maine Medical Center CWIC services, the individual must already be qualified and be receiving the SSI or SSDI. So they come into play once somebody has already been deemed eligible for their benefits. It won't help you through that process, in other words. In looking at Maine Care, if a person is eligible to receive SSI, they will be eligible to receive Maine Care. And if your child was not eligible for Maine Care under your income, they might be eligible once they become 18. Because as Carrie just said a minute ago, it's now based on their own income rather than the parent's income. So the step first is to apply for SSI, and then if they're found eligible, to apply for Maine Care. Clearing up some confusion. So the first point is we want to make sure that you understand what guardianship is. Guardianship is a complete transfer of rights from one individual to another. So it is not automatically granted to the parents and is through the guardianship application process, or the legal process. We do a lot of education and work around the idea of supported decision making, which is considered a less restrictive alternative to guardianship. And we're going to hit on some of those points as we go on here. But guardianship is considered to be the most restrictive, as it is the process of an individual giving up all of their rights to another individual.
And Robin has said partial guardianship should also be considered. So maybe we should follow this up with, after April vacation, doing a supported decision-making workshop for families, and we will put that out to all of you. Yes, Robin, you are correct. Partial guardianship should be an option that should be considered, and all the other least restrictive options. And our supported decision-making workshop is covers all of these options for families and educates them. And really, you can put a bunch of the options together to create the best plan for your child. Karen's asking, is this being taped? I would like to share it with my dad who lives out of the state. Yes, Karen, this is being taped. It's on Facebook Live right now, and Facebook Live does record it and gets it up in live minutes afterwards. And then in the next couple days, it'll also be available on our website as well as YouTube. Our guardianship session would be very much appreciated. Thank you. Perfect. So we are taking a break during April vacation week. As most schools are off, and parents during this time have asked for a break, and we're respecting that. So we won't be offering any webinars over April vacation week, but the following weeks after, we will definitely look to get some more webinars up. We're already in the works for providing some additional webinars, one of them being around self-advocacy, both for professionals, parents, and youth. Also doing some work with the Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies on homeschooling and inclusive studies, also with Voc Rehab. So Libby Stone Sterling and I are working on putting one together, and we will add supported decision-making to that mix. If they do not qualify for Maine Care under the family due to over income, they can apply for Katie Beckett waiver. Cindy, that only applies for individuals who are under the age of 18. So if you're talking about an individual that has turned 18, Katie Beckett no longer applies, and neither does the family income. So an individual who has turned 18 or above, it would be their own income that they would be looking for, which would make them, usually makes them more eligible for Maine Care or for Social Security. Beth Whitehouse says, is there a grace period between when they get dropped from Maine Care as minors, become 18 and need to reapply? What do they do for insurance in the interim? So no grace period. What you need to do is be applying for Social Security. You apply when they become 18. Well, here's the thing. If you have private insurance and are at home, or through, I would have to check about Maine Care as to if the age of 26 applies to if it's the family's primary insurance if they are covered through the age of 26. Because I know under private insurance, a child is covered up until the age of 26 right now. That's through the ACA. That's a good question about Maine Care. I don't know if Tara is still listening and if she has the answer to that. If not, we can follow back up with you, Beth, on that question. But if Maine Care is the family's primary insurance, if the child would be covered until the age of 26. If it's not their primary insurance, the child would be covered until the age of 26 through the primary insurance. Tara says it's not the same as private insurance. So that would mean Karen is saying yes, up to age 26. So, so if it's the private, so if it's the family, Karen's saying if it's the family's primary insurance cover, then they would be covered up to the age of 26. And then as far as grace periods for Maine Care, if it's a secondary insurance, then there is no grace period. Once the child turns 18, they're no longer eligible for Maine Care or for Katie Beckett benefits, and they need to apply as themselves. But if it is the primary insurance, then they should be able to maintain coverage according to what Karen's saying up to the age of 26. We can double check that as well. You can go on to point number 2. I'm just going to keep myself unmuted at this point.
Okay. Well, you pretty much just said what point number 2 is.
Oh.
So it's just talking about if your child receives Social Security benefits, Maine Care, or Katie Beckett as a minor, that they don't carry over when your child turns 18. So you go right through the application for all of these services and programs. And definitely we encourage you to apply as soon as you're able to, because it's definitely a lengthy process in terms of determining eligibility.
For ODES, it's a much lengthier process. For SSDI, I think it's not as lengthy, but for adult services, it can be a very lengthy process, which is why they allow the intake process to start at 17 and a half.
Yeah. And point number 3 is reiterating the point from earlier that make sure that you have an adult case manager if you don't already have one, and make sure the case manager is familiar with all of the rules and the processes of the adult system. This can make a world of difference, as the system can be complex and individualized based on which benefits a person might need. And so having an adult case manager in your court is such an asset.
Tara has chimed in and just says her understanding is that the categories for children is under the age of 18, 19, and 20 years old, and at 21 you're an adult. I think she's speaking specifically to Maine Care. Katie Beckett, though, does end at 18. I know that for a fact. Karen says, don't forget the 18-year-old on Maine Care is responsible for yearly recertification of Maine Care benefits. And those can get complicated, as well as SSI and SSDI being a representative payee. It can be a complicated process, so you need to make sure that you're educated on that process. And if the individual is 18 and being their own representative payee, that they're educated on that process. I am a case manager who has, Don says, I am a case manager who has worked with young adults that have applied for SSI and have been denied, even though there is supporting documentation of diagnosis. And I would say, yes, Don, that's absolutely probably the case and has happened. And even though it's not right, it is frustrating. And that's why we all need to be aware of our appeal processes that are available. And Don also says these same young adults had already been accepted for ODES. That's interesting, because the ODES process seems to me to be more limiting than the SSI process. But yeah, that's frustrating, but I'm not surprised that that happens. And thank you for chiming in, Don. Go ahead, Jodie.
Okay, so again, point number 4, we've just been talking about again, it's just important to realize that if your child did receive services as a minor, that they do not continue into the adult system, and the eligibility process, as well as the criteria for determining eligibility, are different. And for adult services, you need to have a diagnosis of IDD and or autism.
So in other words, those children who are receiving services through OCFS under like an ADD or ADHD or a behavior, most likely will not qualify for the same type of in-home supports through the Office of Aging and Disability Services because they don't have an IDD or a autism diagnosis. That being said, there are other waiver programs that are available, and doesn't mean that they don't qualify for voc rehab. That's a separate process. But specifically for the Office of Aging and Disability Service, it's an IDD or an autism diagnosis that you need to have in order to qualify for those services, which makes it even more confusing for parents. Cindy says, my daughter qualified for private insurance after the age of 26 with a medical letter from the doctor and sent to the private insurance. Due to her disability, she continued to qualify with the private medical insurance as long as the doctor's note was sent every 2 years. And I would say that's wonderful and that's great. And it's probably unique to each insurance company. So check with your insurance company to see if they offer that type of policy. And if they do, for sure, take advantage of it. Go ahead, Jody.
Okay, so the big questions for parents. What does the future look like for your family? Will your child be able to live independently and make responsible decisions? And guardianship is not the only option. What route will your family choose? So I'm glad to hear that we're going to go ahead and schedule a supported decision-making webinar. We have a lot of good information about alternatives to guardianship. Again, it's not just 2 options. It's not just guardianship being the most restrictive and supported decision-making being the least, but there are a whole slew of options that you can put together that may be a good fit for an individual. So stay tuned for more on that. We have a little bit to talk about today on that. Supported decision-making being the least restrictive path for guardianship, it really puts the youth or the young adult at the center of it all. And it allows them to be able to retain their legal rights. So they are not surrendering their legal rights to another individual. The person will then build their support system of their choosing. So they will surround themselves with family members or professionals or friends who can help them to make decisions, who can provide input or guidance, but the individual themselves are the ones making the decisions. They are the ones coming up with their goals and their decisions, and their supporters are simply helping them to attain them. So the young person is the decider, while the parent would be a supporter. The supporter's role is never to convince them or to make a particular decision, but rather a supporter should positively support the individual's decisions and bring to light any kind of concerns or other knowledge to the table. Again, we'll do a lot more on this when we do our webinar on supported decision making, because there's a lot of ins and outs we'd like to cover. But the basic behind this, basic premise is this is a framework. It's not a legal decision, but it is a framework that someone can adopt and put into place in order to maintain their own individual legal rights. Everyone needs supports. There are paid supports and there are natural supports. When we talk about natural supports, we're talking about those relationships that occur in everyday life. So they might be family members or coworkers or friends, but they're the relationships that just occur throughout life. And then there are paid supports. And the paid supports are the supports who are implemented by the individual and their family to guide and assist. Here's a couple of examples of natural and paid supports. Paid supports being school staff, therapists, health professionals, case managers, employment coaches, group living arrangements. And again, those natural supports being those ones that sort of organically are formed through community and social engagement.
So we have a question, does supported decision-making require legal documentation? Supported decision-making is not a legal arrangement, so you do not have to go to court to put a supported decision-making plan in place. We do recommend looking at a supported decision-making plan. There are many different formats out there. We get a little bit more specific in our supported decision-making training, But you should put a supported decision-making plan together so that all those that are participating know the expectations and how they're going to be supporting the individual, but there is nothing legal. Nobody on a supported decision-making team is legally responsible for any decisions that that individual makes. Part of a supported decision-making plan can be partial guardianship, and that would be a separate legal process. And so, but you can document in the supported decision-making plan that for medical decisions, you know, Carrie Woodcock has partial guardianship over Samantha Woodcock and will be responsible for making legally all of her medical decisions. And you could add that to the supported decision-making plan, and I would have to go to court and petition the court for that partial guardianship arrangement. But there is nothing legally required to do a supported decision-making plan. It's just an agreement between the supporter and the person being supported.
Natural support should be the majority of the team, and paid supports should supplement the natural supports in place. So a good way to identify natural supports, if not many come to mind right off the bat, is say, you know, who would I call in an emergency situation? And the people that you generally turn to are the ones that are your natural supports. And again, they should be the ones that comprise the majority of the team. So we're reaching the end of our time, but I wanted to bring up a couple of other workshops that we have. I was going to highlight our supported decision-making one, but I'm glad to hear we're going to move forward with scheduling that. We also offer the self-advocacy workshop, which Dylan Campbell teaches for our youth. And typically we do that within schools, but are happy to be able to offer that virtually now that schools are moving to remote learning. We also have a workshop on transition to kindergarten from CDS, as well as anti-bullying, and a special education, a guide to special education in Maine webinar. So if there's any other questions or comments at that time, I'll just kind of pause for a minute and see what pops up in the chat boxes.
Jodie, can you put up the poll too, please?
Yes, yeah, so I've got to do that. If you guys wouldn't mind, we have 8 multiple choice questions for our polling. Actually, how do I do that? Let's see. Okay, just launch the poll now.
Yeah, there it is.
If you wouldn't mind just filling out the 8 questions, that's really helpful for our grant funders, and it takes just a quick minute.
I also want to, Kathy Adams has been participating in this webinar, and she works for Maine Site, which is an excellent resource for assistive technology. When Kathy asked that question, I should have given her a shout out, so I apologize, but Maine Site is an excellent resource for assistive technology for individuals with disabilities. And Kathy notes that I will be speaking at the Southern Maine Advisory Council on Transition on May 1st meeting, which will be virtual like everything else these days. But yes, I'll be speaking on supported decision-making at that meeting. Maureen says this has been excellent. Thank you so much. And I can't see the full name for some reason, but before we end, I just want to say thank you. Most of the time I see transition workshops happening. They're a bit too far to travel on a school night, so I'm happy they're happening virtually right now. Thank you. We're so happy to be up and virtual and able to provide this information to all of you. There are no questions on Facebook, and Kim Murphy says thanks. So we're gonna keep the poll up. Please continue to visit our Facebook site, and we will also email you as we offer new webinars and virtual trainings. Along with what Jodie listed, like I said, we're looking to do some unique ones specific to the situation we're facing. We're also looking to as well create some virtual support groups, both for youth led by Dylan Campbell, who's going to be our youth coordinator, as well as for parents. So please keep your eyes open. All those things will be happening after April vacation. Amy says, thanks ladies, this was a great follow-up for case management. Jennifer says, thanks so much. Can we print the PowerPoint? Absolutely. I believe it's if you weren't able to access it on our website, email us and let us know, but it is available on our website under online trainings and materials. So please print it out and share it. We will continue to share webinars and trainings. Kathy says, super job, thank you. Can you email us the PowerPoint? Okay. I cannot make the quick poll move up to complete. I am on a Mac. Many thanks, was great. Don't worry about it, Jane. Ann says, oh, okay, thank you. Jennifer says, perfect. And Ann's gonna go to the website. Ann had asked for us to email the PowerPoint. She's gonna go to the website. And if you, for some reason, have a hard time locating it, just email us, we'll send it to you. Robin says, nice job. Robin works for us. Karen says, I'm so person first. When the intake phone application conversation happened, I was stumped. Finally came to the questions. IDD is intellectual developmental disability. Oh yes, Down syndrome. Yes, Down syndrome is an IDD diagnosis. Cindy says, thanks so much. Dylan Campbell says, our transition to high school ebook is also on the website. Thank you, Dylan. We have an electronic book that brings you through this PowerPoint that is also downloadable on our website. Robin says, nice job. This was a great refresher. Karen says, thank you. Please, more virtual trainings. These are awesome. We hear you, Jennifer. We're going to move forward with this. Helen says, excellent. So organized and informative. Wow. Thanks, Helen. Cindy says, I used to attend Bridges transitions back in the day. I did not attend those because I wasn't in the work, but I heard that those were wonderful. Karen says, so I mean, I realized the interviewer didn't know he has IDD. Oh, well, that's a whole other, that's a whole other issue, dear. Karen, and how frustrating. Yes. I don't know how to respond to that now.
Oh dear.
But sometimes we get caught up in our acronyms, so I apologize if we didn't make IDD clear to be intellectual developmental disability. Esther says, my son has autism and wants to tour the country playing the bass or work for Chuck E. Cheese. I'm struggling with trying to help him be independent, but here is a big difference between what he wants and what's realistic. Any advice? If you haven't gotten involved with voc rehabilitation, I would say to try to get involved with voc rehabilitation and working specifically with his school counselors in transition planning, because a lot of times they can come outside, they can think outside of the box and come up with some really unique plans that can take his interests in mind and give him a paid work experience. I mean, it might take a paid work experience at, well, I don't know if you have a Chuck E. Cheese here in Maine, but a paid work experience in a certain area to realize that maybe that's not what he wants to do. And if he likes playing the bass, there's definitely opportunities to get involved in a musical world and working for somebody here in Maine with a musical background so that he can experience that. So it's a lot of outside of the box thinking. So Esther, I would push your case manager at school. And if you're not working with voc rehab, get involved with voc rehab and push them on outside of the box thinking. And call us. We'll walk you through the process too as well to give you some more one-on-one. We have one-on-one peer-to-peer to help with specific situations. So if you're not finding an answer to what you're getting just here in this webinar, please call us. We'll provide much more personalized attention to you. Karen says, thank you. This has been uplifting, just the thing for me this afternoon. That's awesome to hear. Thank you, Karen. Cindy says, driving assessment for those who wants to drive. Who does the driving assessment? Is it Pine Tree? Somebody does a driving assessment for those who want to drive. Do you guys know? Alpha One. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Kim. Alpha One. Thank you, Robin. Alpha One. I knew there was one out there. So yes, there is a driving assessment for those who want to drive, and it can be found through Alpha One. I work for Milestones Family Services in Sanford, which does provide child and adult case management. Thank you, Dawn. I will definitely let colleagues and families know about this webinar in case they would like to watch the recording. Awesome. Thank you, Dawn. Pathways Driving Rehab as well. Thank you, Andrea. I didn't know there was a second one out there. What's awesome about these webinars is we learn just as much as you guys are learning. I love that we're able to sort of still have this natural conversation, and it's reaching far more people. So I can literally say, I don't know the answer to that, but if somebody out there has the answer, and I think we've answered a lot of questions that way today, which is awesome. So thank you everybody for participating and providing the knowledge. We'll stay on for a couple more minutes, address any more questions, and allow you to finish the poll. At this point, if you don't have any more questions and you've done the poll, Kim, email us. We'll provide you with a certificate. We just need your email address. I'll put the email address for the person you should email right here in the chat for a certificate of completion. And Annie says, thank you for all you do. Monica says, Core Health also provides pediatric up to 21 targeted case management, medical, cognitive, and behavioral. I sent an email to Maine Parent Federation with more details. Thank you, Monica. We'll use that as a resource. Bill says, thank you. Good presentation. Kristen says, can you please email me a certificate? Yes, Kristen, we will email you a certificate. I'm going to copy your email address and send that to Deb Newcomb right now. Not seeing all the information in the chat box like the email address you just added. Heidi, D Newcomb, NEWCOMBE at mpf.org. That said, if you're not able to get that all down, if you go to our website and just email us through that contact, we will get the information to you. Kim Murphy says, AMHC in Northern Maine, Child and Family Behavior Health Home Case Management. Thank you, Kim. Dylan put Deb's email address back up there. Annie says, can you email me the materials from today also, please and thank you. She provided her email address. Heidi Johnson says, thank you. Cindy says, if it's okay, I would like a certificate as well. Thank you. Dylan put Deb's email address back in there, and Kim Humphrey put her email. So we do get the chat notes emailed to us as well, Dylan and Jody. So we will have a list of everybody who needs a certificate. And we will get that to Deb and put her on that. So we will get you certificates. Please keep in mind that while we're not going into the office, it might take a few days to get the certificates out to you. We're trying to only send an employee into the office every couple of days to check email. So, and thank you for providing me with your email address, Kim. Jane says, who the 8-year-old just showed me how to use 2 fingers to move the bowl and complete it. Love it. I love it. I know we need our kids' help with technology. I got Rachel's email address for a certificate. Thank you. I'd love a certificate as well. I'm getting all, Andrea, I see you. Amy, I'd love the materials to be emailed to me as well. I would also like a certificate. I see that, Amy. Thank you. Just keep it up for a couple more minutes. So Dylan and Jody, what I'm gonna do is thank you both very much from Anne. I will email you the chat from this so that you get everybody who has requested a certificate materials, and you can make sure that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and if they ask for a certificate and didn't provide us with their email address, we have their email address in their registration, so we can look them up and do that as well. And we'll just give it a few more minutes as we still have people filing and saying they would like certificates as well. So. I see you, Amy, and I see you, Monica, for your certificates and your email addresses. Yeah, and we've got your chat, Jennifer, showing that you want a certificate. So if you can't get through to us via email, I'm going to send the chat to our employees to make sure that everybody who's requesting a certificate through the chat will be able to get one. I see you, Amanda. Caitlin Littlefield says, thank you. Could I please get a certificate? I see that, Caitlin. Maureen is requesting a certificate as well. I see that, Karen. Jennifer says, thanks a lot. Stacy says, I would like a certificate. I see that. Bill is also requesting a certificate. I see that as well. Josie is asking for a certificate. Karen says she was stirring supper, so I missed it. I have my husband running around making dinner right now. I'm not sure why Deb's email is getting sent back, but like I said, we have all your, I apologize for that. We have your requests in the chat box. Karen says, have a good weekend. And Heidi says, I've emailed for a certificate. Thank you. See you, Heidi. Thanks, Dylan. He's put up Deb's email address again. Oh, hold on. Somebody just popped up in the push. Can you get case managers if you have physical disabilities but not cognitive? And no services other than through school at IEP. If your son is looking to receive services through the Office of Children and Family Services, I think it depends on the physical disability, but I'm unsure. I think there might be other waivers. He does have Maine care, so if he has Maine care, he should be able to qualify for Section 28 services, but he may not qualify based on his physical disability for case management, as that's usually to provide in-home supports. Kelly, if you could give us a call or email us, we'll look into that more deeply for you and get you an answer specifically. I believe there are other waiver programs that would be available to him that don't necessarily fall under Section 28, so that he could get case management services for his physical disability. For example, there's like the brain injury waiver, there's a waiver for hearing impaired and blind. So there might be a waiver that we could look into that would specifically meet his needs for physical, but I don't believe he'd qualify for Section 28. So Monica says he may qualify for medically targeted case management. Thank you, Monica. That's what I was looking for, is that option. And if you give us a call, Kelly, we can help walk you through that process. You're welcome. I usually, oh, wait, is there another question? Or, oh, no, okay, I answered that. Answer live, answer live, answer live, okay. I usually let the participants sort of dwindle down before I drop off, just to make sure that we get everything we need in the chat box.
Sounds good.
But we're gonna give it a few more minutes and then we're gonna end the meeting. So if you need anything from us in the chat box, please do so in the next couple of minutes. And as soon as this ends, I'm gonna email Jodie and Dylan the chat so that you guys can go through and do certificates and any other materials that came through on the chat. Nope. Okay, I think we are okay with the chat box. So we're gonna go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you for all those that have attended and provided us feedback. For all of you that requested certificates, we will make those happen for you in the next few days, probably next week is when you can expect to receive them. And please feel free to contact us with any questions or concerns you may have moving forward. Thank you, Dylan and Jodie, and everybody have a good night.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.